We've already learned about abstraction. The purpose of abstraction is to shield details that aren't important. The same concept can be applied to programming. We can write functions or procedures to hold some of the details that we don't need to see, and then just call those procedures from our program. This helps manage complexity, especially in complex programs. In this lesson, you'll learn a little bit more about how to use procedures and parameters in programming.
Hey everyone, it's Mr. Levin back again, this time with a lesson on procedures. Procedures are, in this lesson, emphasized by looking at AP pseudocode. So we're going to look at how the AP pseudocode framework writes out procedures, and you're going to learn what a procedure is and why it might be useful for you to add them to your program. Let's get started. One of the ways that programmers help each other out is by writing procedures for each other to use. It means that if one programmer has already written the code to do something, they can package it nicely into one little block or one little command, and then they can publish that as a library of procedures that other programmers can use. So when you use Scratch, most of the blocks that are in there are actually procedures, right? Someone had to write the code behind the scenes to make the cat move across the screen just when you use the move procedure. Similarly, in the AP pseudocode reference, you have some procedures that the College Board has given you that you can use without really having to know how they work behind the scenes. So the first example is the display procedure. The display procedure takes an expression and displays that value to the screen followed by a space. So this expression is the parameter or the argument that goes into this procedure, and then the display is the name of the procedure. And so we're going to see a couple of different types of procedures, but the first one is called a procedure with a parameter, right? So it has some information that goes into it. The next procedure is input. Now input is a procedure that doesn't have a parameter. And so when you write this line of code, all that means is that the computer is now going to request a value from whoever's using the program and then return that value to you so that you can use it in your code somewhere. We have one other built-in procedure that we need to know about, and that's the return procedure. The return procedure is essentially going to allow us to pass information from within one procedure out to the larger program that you're writing. And the best way to understand return is to see it in action. But first, we want to look at the two different templates that the College Board has given you in your AP pseudocode reference. The first template here says procedure, proc name, parameter 1, parameter 2, ... and then a block of statements. So this is a procedure, and it says proc name, but that's just a placeholder. You could have a procedure that's named draw a circle, or say hello, or add two numbers together. All of those are possible proc names, and then this parameter 1, 2, ... is just telling us that we can have as many arguments as we want being passed in as parameters. And then we have some code in here, a block of statements that make up that procedure. The next example is similar to our procedure up here, but this one actually has the return statement inside of this procedure. And so that return statement here basically means that when we call this proc name procedure, we need to have a variable prepared ahead of time that's going to collect the value that gets returned by this statement. So let's look at an example of this. Here's sort of a simplified version of what you just saw. Two different types of procedures. One simply takes in parameters, takes in arguments, and then runs the code, and then the other one actually returns some kind of a value. But the example here is a procedure called add, addition, right? Now this might seem a little less useful because you do already have the plus operator to do addition for you, but you can imagine building on this procedure to write something that adds up 3 numbers or adds up 4 numbers. But for this first example, we're just adding together 2 numbers, a number A and a number B. We're adding them and saving them into a variable called sum, and then here's our return statement, and it returns that number sum, right? So this is a procedure that you wrote ahead of time, and then this is our actual program code. A is a number that gets input by the user. B is the second number that gets input. Our result here is a variable that we use to save whatever is returned by our add function. And then this last procedure is called math, and here is the definition of math. And if you look at math, math is actually going to use our display procedure that we learned at the very beginning. And math as a procedure doesn't return any information. It just does a logical operation. It checks if the answer to our addition problem is less than 0. If it is, it displays that we have a negative answer. And if it doesn't, then it displays a positive number. So one thing to notice in this code is that first we get the input for A, then we get the input for B, and so far our code is working down sequentially through our operations. But something happens when you call a procedure. When you call a procedure, it actually interrupts the sequence of executing of statements, the sequential execution of statements, and it jumps over to wherever that code or that procedure was defined, and it works through those lines of code before it then comes back to wherever that placeholder was kept, and then continues sequentially down through your code. So sometimes when we talk about procedure calls, we talk about procedures as interrupting the flow of control, but leaving a placeholder to remind us that once we've finished running all the code in our procedure over here, we can come back here and then move down to the next line. One of the advantages of using procedures is that instead of having a really long program with lots of code in it, we end up simplifying. We end up simplifying our code so that it's more readable, it's easier to edit, and this is a concept called abstraction that you're going to see a bit later in the course.